The Q'Orl are a highly intelligent and technologically advanced Xenos race which are native to the western reaches of the galaxy. From a galactic standpoint, the Q'Orl are considered to be a relatively minor race despite laying claim to their own interplanetary empire. The formation of this empire, known within official records as the Swarmhood, was in itself a fairly impressive undertaking for the Q'Orl race, due in part to the fact that Q'Orl starships appear to lack any form of light-speed propulsion technology such as warp drives. While the Q'Orl may not be as widespread as humanity, the Orcs, or even the Tau, they are nonetheless an incredibly hostile and territorial species, known to swiftly intercept and slaughter anyone foolish enough to dare enter their space, regardless as to whether such intruders are invading soldiers or hapless civilians. In order to mark the boundaries of their territory, the Q'Orl will both erect a series of monolithic structures upon their worlds, as well as setting adrift a number of deep space markers, which serve to visually represent the borders of their empire. These markers will often be adorned with vast amounts of text, proclaiming the supposed superiority of the Q'Orl race, as well as their intent to expand their domain and bring new worlds into the fold of the Swarmhood, with much of the race holding the belief that expansion, conquest, and victory are needed in order to justify the deaths of their ancestors. In a manner eerily similar to that of humanity, the ancestral homeworld of the Q'Orl, known as Loqiit, is treated by the species as the religious capital of the entire Swarmhood, being revered if not outright worshipped by the Q'Orl as the holiest location within the entire galaxy where their dead are lovingly laid to rest. Because Loqiit has been transformed into what is effectively a vast planetary graveyard, much of the population has instead chosen to reside within vast orbiting hive structures, only setting foot upon the world's surface in order to deposit the exoskeletal remains of their dead. Nevertheless, Loqiit remains quite possibly the most formidably defended world of the entire Swarmhood, with a vast fleet of heavily armed ships frequently patrolling the Loqiit system, ready to both swiftly and violently respond to any potential threat, much like a swarm of insects protecting their hive from a potential predator. And yet, in spite of the Q'Orl's best efforts to protect their ancestral homeworld from any would-be invaders, there is at least one documented instance where the enemies of the Swarmhood not only came perilously close to conquering the world of Loqiit itself, but would even succeed in pushing the Q'Orl race to the very brink of extinction. In late M37, after encountering a seemingly innocuous group of humans, an unprecedented outbreak of disease would begin to spread throughout the entirety of the Swarmhood, killing or otherwise incapacitating untold numbers of Q'Orl in the process. While the exact cause of this epidemic remains somewhat unclear, it has been speculated that this plague was, in itself, an unnatural warp-spawned contagion, with some even suggesting that the Q'Orl had inadvertently come into contact with followers of the chaos god Nurgle, the god of pestilence and decay. Having been weakened by this plague, the world of Loqiit would come under assault from the forces of an unknown aggressor which seemed intent on driving the Q'Orl race into extinction. Much to the surprise of the Q'Orl, however, they would receive aid from an unexpected source, a race which was described as being similar in appearance to humans, but taller with a more slender build, which has led many to believe that these mysterious allies were in fact from one of the various Eldari sects. Thanks to the timely intervention of the Aeldari, the Q'Orl were able to successfully drive their foes from their space. However, following the culmination of the battle, the Aeldari would demand compensation for their services, specifically payment in the form of a Q'Orl queen. Offended by such an outrageous proposition, the Q'Orl would terminate their short-lived alliance with the Aeldari, only for the Aeldari to kidnap Loqiit's reigning queen before presumably disappearing into the webway, an act that the Q'Orl would never forgive the Aeldari for. Thankfully for the Q'Orl, however, an egg containing a queen embryo had been laid prior to the onset of this particular series of events, ensuring that life for the denizens of Loqiit would eventually return to normal. But the one question that currently remains unanswered is just what exactly happened to the kidnapped Q'Orl queen. According to the historical records of the Q'Orl themselves, as detailed within the book Xenology, the reason as to why the Eldari was so intent in obtaining a Q'Orl queen for themselves was to create what was described as an uncorroded swarm. While the exact meaning of this term remains somewhat unclear, the most common hypotheses are that it refers to either a genetically engineered race that is less susceptible to disease, or one that is capable of resisting the powers of chaos itself. The former would initially appear to be the more likely possibility, due in part to the fact that the plague that had spread throughout the ranks of the Swarmhood was described by the Q'Orl themselves as being a corrosion. But given that this plague was also rumoured to be both chaotic in origin and warp-based in nature, it is still equally possible that the idea of this uncorroded swarm could be referring to beings that are able to withstand the corrupting influence of chaos, or at the very least protect them from the effects of warp-spawned contagions. Some have suggested that the Q'Orl Queen was used to help facilitate the creation of beings from an entirely different Xenos race, one that is seemingly unrelated to either the Aeldari or the Q'Orl themselves, the Tau. The reasoning for this is due to the fact that individuals from the Tau Empire's ethereal caste sport a unique diamond-shaped organ within their foreheads, one which the Tau of the other castes are known to lack. While the exact purpose of this organ remains unconfirmed, it appears to be somewhat similar in appearance, if not outright identical, to one which is responsible for the production of hormonal and pheromonal fluids within the bodies of the Q'Orl. Because of this, some have suggested that the Eldari had utilized genetic material harvested from the Q'Orl Queen for the purpose of engineering the ethereal caste, and in turn guide the societal evolution and technological development of the Tau race. In addition, because the Tau are known to demonstrate a relatively weak warp presence when compared to other races, this could potentially make them less susceptible to the corrupting influence of chaos, rendering them, in essence, an uncorroded swarm. However, such an idea would appear to be utterly impossible due to one incredibly important fact: the time as to when the Q'Orl Queen was kidnapped. According to the Q'Orl, as shown within Xenology, the Queen would be abducted by the Eldari sometime during late M37, whereas the Ethereals, as detailed within the 6th edition Tau Codex, had first revealed themselves to the other Tau tribes in 791 M36, roughly 1,000 years before the events that led to the kidnapping of the Q'Orl Queen. There is also the fact that, according to the book Deathwatch Mark of the Xenos, the diamond organ sported by Ethereals appears to have no biological function, although it is nonetheless possible that this particular specimen documented by the Deathwatch was either a dud or had otherwise been deliberately altered in some way. In either case, it would appear that the presence of the diamond-shaped organ within the skulls of Tau Ethereals is nothing more than a simple case of convergent evolution, much like how the placental mammal Smilodon and the marsupial Thylacosmilus developed a number of shared traits and a similar appearance during Terra's prehistory, despite the two species being completely unrelated to one another. But there is always a possibility that the claims made by the Eldari, specifically their supposed desire to create an uncorroded swarm, may have been, in actuality, an outright lie, especially if the Eldari that came to the aid of the Q'Orl were, in actuality, Drukari, the cruelest and most sadistic of the various Eldari sects. Instead, it's entirely possible that the Eldari, if they were indeed Drukari, could have simply requested the Q'Orl Queen under the false pretense of helping the Q'Orl race develop a resistance to disease, or even a way to combat against the powers of chaos, only for their true motives to be something else entirely. Such an idea is not entirely unprecedented, as the Drukari have been known to employ such deceptive methods before. As detailed within the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex, the Tau Empire, after barely managing to repel the invading forces of High Fleet Gorgon, would find their empire virtually surrounded by a splinter tendril of High Fleet Kraken. In response, the Tau would begin to desperately recruit every military ally and 2-bit mercenary band that they could, so as to prevent the Tyranids from encroaching deeper into their territory, regardless of the potential consequences involved. It was around this time that Yuri and Rakarth, the Lord of the Prophets of Flesh Homunculi Coven would offer his services to the Tau against the tendrils of Kraken on the condition that the Tau would participate in what he would term as a cultural exchange. While they were initially hesitant to accept Rakarth's offer due to his horrific appearance and unsettling mannerisms, desperation would win out over common sense and the Tau would agree to the Drukari's terms. The Homunculi Coven's hordes of Raks and Grotesques would be deployed to the verdant world of Vigos before tearing their way through the Tyrannid ranks with impunity and even shrugging off mortal wounds as if they were little more than minor inconveniences. Eventually, Rakarth would request his payment from Tau High Command, specifying that he desired 77 individuals from each of the Tau castes in addition to at least 7 ethereals. While the Tau refused to allow the ethereals to be added to this cultural exchange due to the ethereal caste being essentially revered as the ruling priesthood of the Tau Empire, they were nonetheless willing to acquiesce to Rakarth's demands in all other areas, believing it to be a small price to pay for the greater good. In time, the Tau sought to reclaim the polar continent of Vigos from the Tyrannids, with the Drukari more than happy to offer their assistance once more. However, as Rakarth's forces unleashed their grotesques, the Tau would note that these specific biomechanical monstrosities, instead of boasting the pale and pallid complexions that they were used to seeing, now had flesh that sported various shades of blue and grey, skin tones that are commonly associated with the Tau. Upon realizing that this was the fate that befell the delegation of volunteers that participated in this so-called cultural exchange, the Tau would once again be contacted by Rakarth, who immediately demanded that they deliver him either 7 ethereals or 7,077 lesser Tau as payment for his services. Enraged, the Tau vowed that they would make Rakarth pay for his crimes, and attempted to mobilize an attack against the Drukari fleet. However, the Tau would realise too late that this was little more than a distraction, as the nearby sept world of Rubicon would come under a full-scale assault from both the Prophets of Flesh Coven and the Cabal of the Black Heart, led by none other than Asdrubal Vecht, the Supreme Overlord of Q'Orl himself. While Rubicon's resident Kroot and Vespid would be mercilessly slaughtered by the Drukari, the entirety of the world's Tau population would be taken prisoner and spirited away back to the darkest reaches of Q'Orl. With this in mind, it's entirely reasonable to assume that the Q'Orl Queen could have been kidnapped by the Drukari for a similar such purpose in mind. After all, as mentioned earlier, the Drukari are themselves well known to demand payment for any services that they may offer to other races, often under false pretenses. Since the Q'Orl Queen is presumably capable of laying vast quantities of eggs in a relatively short period of time, much like the queens of eusocial insect colonies, then the resulting offspring could potentially be utilized for a number of different purposes. For example, the wings of Q'Orl drones could theoretically be grafted onto the bodies of those individuals that wish to become Scourges, members of the Drukari race that have been surgically altered to be capable of true flight, or perhaps their chitinous exoskeletons could be used in the construction of ornate suits of armor, clothing, or jewelry. Alternatively, perhaps the Drukari simply sought out a Q'Orl Queen so that the gladiatorial pits of Q'Orl will have a steady supply of creatures for the witch cults to slaughter for the entertainment of the other Drukari. Or maybe a particularly eccentric Drukari lord seeks to utilize such creatures as their own personal army, perhaps with the intention of one day unleashing them upon their rivals. Or perhaps the Drukari simply desire to have a steady supply of souls to torment and feed upon in order to stave off the attentions of the Chaos God Slaanesh, who is continuously leeching off of the spiritual essence of each and every member of the Drukari race. On the other hand, there is an outside chance that the race that spirited away the Q'Orl Queen were not related to the Eldari in any way, and were in fact members of an altogether different Xenos species, one which currently remains undocumented by the Imperium of Man. Whatever the truth may be, should the Q'Orl once again encounter the beings that kidnapped their queen, their vengeance will be swift, bloody, and excruciating, all for the glory of the Eternal Swarmhood. What do you think? Leave a comment below, Thanks for watching.